Welcome to the Mixtape with Scott. I'm the host, Scott Cunningham. I'm a professor of economics at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. The purpose of the podcast or the podcast's goal is to basically listen to the stories of living economists under the conviction that we use stories to help us kind of understand the world around us, our own lives, and other people. And, one of the ways that we can really be changed is just by listening to other people. And that's part of the purpose of the podcast, is to just listen to the stories of living economists that we've all heard of, or many of us have heard of, but don't really know their work. Also related to that, we know their work, but we don't know them. And when we know their work, it's usually kind of a selection on, y'all have heard me say this, it's kind of a selection on dependent variable thing. Why do you know this work? Because it's already impactful. It's already well known. It's already published. We don't know about the papers that died. We don't know about the challenges they had going forward. The purpose of the podcast is to try to talk to people and try to go back and hear their life lived forward, rather than just looking at the end of things when we read their papers, because all of us are living our lives forward. But then also it's a oral history of the economics profession. It's a non-randomly selected oral history, because all oral histories will not be the story. There is no the story. There's just biased stories. And so I have biases. My biases are: I love causal inference, love econometrics, love labor, love the story of the increase in the demand for PhD economists in tech industry, public policy economists. There's a lot of stuff like that I really love. But I also really love, within that area of causal inference and econometrics, I really love this stream of the design work, people like Angrist, Imbens, David Card, Orley, Ashenfelter, Princeton, and then the model-based approach, which would be 1%. It would be the structural work, would be generally what we're talking about. But within micro, that would be James Heckman. And so I've been trying to this year organize more interviews with the students of people. Now, I was already doing the students of Gary Becker. That kind of has slowed down a little bit. I'm going to probably pick that back up. But then I'm also doing the students of Josh Angrist, the students of David Card, the students of Hito Imbens, and the students of James Heckman, which is a lead-in to this person who's also extremely well known. But, I kind of need these narrative hooks like that to kind of build this narrative in my head that helps me just kind of navigate the selection of people and try to build the story I'm interested in, which is the flow of Chicago in econometrics, and Heckman in particular and his students. So today's interview is with a professor of economics at the University of Wisconsin. Interestingly enough, he is the James J. Heckman Professor of Economics at Wisconsin, Christopher Tabor. Christopher Tabor is a labor economist and a kind of an applied econometrician. And he is one of Heckman's many students and co-authors and collaborators, and has gone on to be a very important labor economist and applied econometrician himself. He says in the talk he doesn't really consider himself an econometrician. That was news to me, but that's who we're going to listen to today. So thanks so much for tuning in. If you like this podcast, first of all, just say thank you for tuning in. Thanks for everything. And I enjoy so much doing it. And so it's been really fun to know other people get into the same kind of things as me. So that's pretty cool. And, but if you do like it and you think that, that you want to share it with someone, share it, like it, recommend it. But now I'm going to turn it over to myself and Chris right now. All right. See you in a minute. Well, it's a pleasure to have with me on the podcast someone that I've never met before, but known about Dr. Chris Tabor for a long time. Chris, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, it was great to have me. This is fun.
Can you, for the sake of the listener, tell us where you work and what your title is, where you live?
So I live in Madison, Wisconsin, or McFarland, Wisconsin, actually, which is right outside of outside of Madison. I guess my formal title, I'm the James J. Heckman Professor, the Walker Family Distinguished Chair, and I'm also currently the chair of the Department of Wisconsin, the
Oh,
Department of Economics at University of Wisconsin-Madison.
oh, I bet that's neat that you have a chair named after Dr. Heckman.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was something that I got last year, and I'm supposed to pick somebody.
Oh, you have to
I
give it
did
up?
what?
You have to give it up?
What do you mean?
What do you mean you pick somebody?
I had no. I'm sorry. I had to pick somebody to name the chair after. So
Oh.
it's an honorary professorship from the university, and they
Oh,
want me to pick a famous economist to name it after that's been influential in my career. And for me, it was obvious who to pick.
oh, that's so cool. I bet that's neat.
It really
Um,
is, yeah.
well, okay, so let's go ahead and start. So, um, this is an icebreaker. Can you tell me about maybe a vacation that you had, maybe when you were younger or maybe even more recently that, it's not necessarily your favorite vacation, but for some reason it always pops in your head every now and then?
I mean, probably the most fun vacation I had was the first time we took my kids to Europe. So they were, I guess the youngest one was 6 at the time. And then, something like 10 and 12. And we started in Steyr, Austria, and we were there for sort of a week. I was there for an academic thing, and then we kind of traveled across Europe together as a family.
Oh,
We've gone on other vacations, but nothing. I mean, that was kind of the first very big one,
yeah.
and it was a lot of fun.
Oh, I bet it was fun watching them have fun. I bet that was really
Yeah,
neat.
yeah,
Yeah.
and interact and see all the different things.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, so where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Connecticut. So we kind of moved from a bunch of different places in Connecticut. Actually, I lived in Philadelphia when I was very little. Um, but then and my parents kind of settled in Salisbury, Connecticut, which is the northwest corner of Connecticut. It's the most rural part of Connecticut, probably.
Oh, so you grew up in rural Connecticut?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we moved around, so we lived in some suburbs. We moved there when I was in ninth grade.
Oh, oh, where were you before that?
So I guess going backwards, before that, I lived in Wilton, Connecticut, which is part of Fairfield County, kind of suburb of New York.
Oh,
Before that, we lived in Bethany, Connecticut, which is close to New Haven, and then Oxford, Connecticut before that, and then Philadelphia before that.
are those all close to each other? Are you kind of like moving, like your parents are buying houses, or what is
They're
all
all,
that
I mean, Oxford and Bethany were pretty close to each other.
about?
Wilton's probably an hour away from those, and I mean it's Connecticut, so nothing's very far from anywhere else in Connecticut.
Yeah.
The first two places are super close. The other place are a little bit further away.
What did your parents do for a living? Why were y'all moving so much?
So my dad was a social worker,
Hmm.
um, and that's why. That's why we're in Philadelphia. Um, and then moved to Connecticut. And he was a social worker for Southern Connecticut State College, which was in New Haven. I think now Southern Connecticut State University. But then around then he had a career change. I don't know, when he was around 40 or something like that, and decided to become a minister.
Oh,
So then the last two moves, the first job his first job was in Wilton, Connecticut as a minister, and then he became minister in Salisbury, Connecticut, and was there for 25 years before
oh
he
wow.
retired.
What denomination was it?
United Church of Christ.
Oh, was the family surprised when that happened, or was that you could see that coming?
I mean, I would have been in something like fifth grade or fourth grade when this happened. So
Okay.
I didn't see it coming, but
Yeah.
um, my
Huh.
mom probably did. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the jobs aren't that different, right? A lot of being
Right.
a minister is counseling.
Right. I see. Okay. Okay. So you were moving around because he's going to different churches.
The last two, most of the moves actually were in the social work days.
Oh.
So he only ever served in two different churches.
Okay. Well, so did you have any siblings?
Yeah. Actually, I have five different or six siblings. Five
Oh,
siblings. Sorry, six of us. Yeah.
wow, wow. So where are you in the birth order?
I'm the oldest.
You're the
I'm the
oldest.
oldest. Yeah,
Okay.
and the younger two are much younger. So the younger two are the age of my kids.
Oh,
Um,
wow. So when you were moving so much, was it hard because you're like, having to lose friends and then start new ones and all that kind of stuff?
it was, and again, a lot of the moves were when I was very young.
Yeah.
So a bunch of the moves were um, before kindergarten.
Okay.
So then after that, it was really only two. So we lived in Bethany when I was in kindergarten. We moved to Wilton when I was in between fifth and sixth grade, and then Salisbury between ninth and 10th grade, or
Yeah.
eighth and ninth grade.
That's when I moved
Yeah,
to eighth and ninth. But even that can be that even that's kind of actually pretty hard.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that because then all the friendships have already been they're a little bit
Right. That
harder to
that
crack.
was that was definitely the hardest
Yeah.
of the moves. Yeah.
Yeah. So where could I have found you on a Saturday, like, but before that ninth grade move, before that eighth grade move? What would you have been doing on a Saturday?
Hanging out with my friends,
Yeah.
probably decent chance watching sports, watching
Yeah.
some football. Well, I get some football or some basketball. Yeah,
Yeah. You were pretty athletic or pretty into sports when you were younger.
I was not athletic. I was. I actually became a decent cross country runner in high school, but prior to that, I was not a good athlete. But I enjoyed watching sports.
Yeah. What was your
Yeah.
favorite sport?
I mean, what at the time? So this would have been in the 1970s, living in Middle Connecticut, which would meant this is a time when half of the kids in the class were Yankees fans and half of the kids in the class were Red Sox fans.
Oh,
So I was a Red Sox fan,
okay.
but your alliances had to be pretty strong.
Okay. Well, so what did you want to be when you grew up? When you were like those early days when you're like, here's what I want to be when I grow up.
That's interesting. I mean, I don't. When I was really young, I don't remember. I For a long time, I was going to be a lawyer.
Hmm.
Like, and I mean, this is more kind of in high school. I don't know. For some reason, I saw law as an interesting thing to do.
Hmm.
Some thoughts about going into accounting.
Hmm. What kind of student were you in high school?
I was a good student. Yeah, I wasn't a great student. I wasn't a great student in eighth grade, but I kind of came to my own in high school.
Yeah.
And yeah, I did very well in high school, and I went to the University of Chicago
Yeah. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
undergraduate. So
Right. Right. What kind of stuff were you? What kind of student would if your teacher if I could have talked to your teachers, they would say, "Well, Chris is this kind of student." What would they have said?
I thoughtful and hardworking. I think they would have said.
Hmm. Well, so what did you know about the University of Chicago before, when you were applying for schools? As a young person, how did you even like, how did that even, what was your
That
experience?
it was a strange thing actually growing up in Connecticut. You're very much used to the schools on the East Coast, and you
Right.
maybe heard of some schools on the West Coast. Um, but I like there's that famous picture of New York, like the
Yeah.
world is New York, where you don't even see the Midwest, and
Right.
that's kind of the way that it was
Yeah.
in Connecticut. So I sort of planned on going to probably school in somewhere on the East Coast. But I remember just going. I had never heard of the University of Chicago. And I remember seeing it in some college book and reading about it and saying, "Oh, that seems kind of interesting."
What kind of
Um,
stuff would you read about? The great text stuff?
no, I'm talking about like college admissions things.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
no, just college admissions. Yeah, describing different schools that you could go to. So I
but
saw the
it's
University of
that, isn't
Chicago.
it that great text tradition? They have that
Yeah,
big,
it is.
yeah.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
was it that really stood out though? Was it that or was it something else?
Um, I don't know if it was anything. I mean, I applied to a number of different schools. I ended up my choice. I got it actually from my both of my parents went to Penn.
Hmm.
Um, I think both of my grandfathers went to Penn. My
Huh.
grandmother got a master's degree at Penn on one side of the family. On the other side of the family, I would have been the fifth generation at Penn.
Wow.
Um, so that was sort of where I thought I would go.
Yeah.
I got into both Chicago and Penn, but then ultimately decided Chicago was a better place. So there was also a more generous financial aid package from Chicago than from Penn.
Yeah.
So which is kind of where I end up there. For a lot of us, it's just these kind of random things.
Well,
Um,
what was Chicago like for you when you first show up that first year? I mean, what's the atmosphere like, and what was it like for you?
for me, it was. I mean, Chicago has this reputation of being very academic, very studious, very nerdy with nothing going on. Socially, for me, it was kind of the opposite. I got really lucky, and I ended up in a house. The Chicago divides things up in houses. So a house is kind of a social thing where you get to know the people in your house. I ended up with a bunch of people in the same house as me that had similar interests,
Mm,
um, and formed friendships with them. And they're still my closest friends in life are those friends. And I mean, I was texting. We have group text that I was on this morning, talking about what happened in the NBA yesterday.
right. Yeah, I have that kind of thing too. It makes a big difference as an adult having those college buddies. Do y'all get
Yeah.
together and do stuff?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we get together. Yeah, usually a couple times a year. Actually, they all live on the East Coast, so they actually get together more often than me. I usually see them once a year, and then actually once every 5 years, we kind of do our own reunion in Chicago.
Mm.
And that's a bigger group of people than the people that I see all the time.
Well, so what's your first interaction with economics in Chicago? Is it like is like when you land at Chicago, is it kind of like you immediately start hearing about the economics department, kind of like regardless of whether you're going to major in it?
You hear about it. You hear about it a lot. I mean, a lot of the tradition in Chicago is there's these T-shirts with a long list of Nobel Prizes winners from Chicago, and a big chunk of them are from economics. So you hear about it.
Yeah.
You hear about it that way. I was a math major. I double majored. I essentially double majored in math and econ.
Mm. Hmm. How'd you find econ? Why'd you do the double major? Was that because somebody told you to, or you just naturally did that?
It was. I mean, I was interested. I was interested in both. Honestly, I mean, Chicago econ was sort of a blow off major. I mean, I don't want to insult people that majored in econ at Chicago, but to me it wasn't as challenging, and it was easier. Math was more of a challenge, and I could handle the math.
Right.
Um, so I did, and I was interested in both, and I did both. I wasn't technically an econ major,
Mm.
because at the time math was part of the social science group, and I'm sorry, math was part of the physical science group, and econ was part of the social science group. There were some social science specific courses that I
Mm.
never took.
Yeah.
Um, so
So
I
you
didn't
took
take
all the econ, but you
I
didn't do the
took all of
prereq.
the econ to qualify for the econ major, but like I didn't take Western civilization, which was something that I would have had to take in
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right,
to
right.
be a social science major.
Well, so what was it then about if it, it's not like it was pretty easy. What was it about econ that if you remember, sort of like catching a little bit of your heart though?
I mean, I think I like economics, like a lot of us like economics. I like the formality. I mean, I'm pretty good at math, and I like the formality of math. I mean, not compared to serious people in math, but I like the formality of math.
Hmm.
Um, but then applying it to questions that are more interesting for the world, which I mean, and that's really what economics is
Yeah,
taking this formality that we like in math, but then using it to analyze more important issues,
right,
than you would talk about in a math class.
right, right. So was there like when you were an undergrad, was there any professors or any classes that sort of had like an unusually large impression on you, left a kind of a bigger imprint than normal?
The very first class I took was Sam Peltzman,
Oh,
um, taught like Econ 101,
yeah.
and
Oh,
I
so
can
it's not
still
like
remember that. Yeah.
Oh, what's he like as a professor?
He's great. He's very engaging. Um,
Mm.
Seth Sanders was my TA, so somebody I still run into, but he was my TA. Don't think he remembers this, but he was my TA
Oh,
in this Econ 101.
oh, so he was a graduate student.
He was a graduate student at the time. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, so did you know about these like, big giants when you were an undergrad, like Gary Becker and Dr. Heckman and others?
I didn't.
Milton
No, I
Friedman,
didn't.
or
I really,
those reputations weren't
Milton
around?
Friedman, of course, like
Yeah.
everybody knew who Milton Friedman was. He wasn't there. I don't think he was. I don't remember exactly when he left. It was certainly before I started graduate school, but I think it was actually before I started undergraduate. So I mean, Milton Friedman at the time was. I knew about him way before.
Yeah.
Way before I went to college. No, I kind of learned slowly about it. It's partly I was more of a math major than
Right.
econ major, which meant there's sort of I took the econ classes, but I didn't think that much
Yeah.
about economics.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's funny, there's not a lot of schools when you think about it. There's not a whole lot of schools that have like a kind of a feel of like a Hall of Fame. But Chicago kind of has this feel of
they
like
definitely do.
Hall of
Yes,
Fame going back like 50, to Aaron director and, just going back forever. It's just
right,
filled with characters.
right. Yeah, for a very long time. Yeah.
Did you feel that when you were an undergrad or even
Oh,
get
for
like,
sure. As an undergraduate, no,
yeah,
I didn't. I don't. I mean, I knew the reputation, and I knew who some of the people were, but I mean, most of the bigger people didn't teach undergraduate classes
mm-hmm,
very often.
mm-hmm.
Um, I think I'm. Yeah. I mean, towards the end, I did. I took a class with Fogel actually.
With
I
Fogel.
might have been with Fogel. One of the last classes he taught on, of course, on slavery.
Oh,
Um, I took
he already
as
won
a
the Nobel
senior.
Prize?
No, he had not won the Nobel Prize at that
Oh,
point. But yeah, I guess so. I guess but at that point, like I knew who he was, and I knew
yeah,
he was a really big figure. So I
right.
think by my senior year, I knew who they were, but it took a while.
What about Becker? Because you ended up doing all this education and labor later. What did you know about him when you were an undergrad?
I knew there's actually a funny. So you have to take the Common Core at Chicago. So you write course. You have to take things in the general social sciences. So I took a class where we had to write a paper with I think an anthropology professor,
Mm,
and I used um, kind of the logic that I was using to think about things in economics to analyze the things that I was doing in his class, and I ended up getting not a good grade on the class. And he started complaining about Becker and Becker's way of thinking about things.
yeah.
But at that point, I didn't know that. So that was the first I heard of who Becker was.
Wow.
Um,
How is that possible? It seems like it would just be like everywhere, but it sounds like there's some sort of segmentation at the undergrad level or
as
something.
an undergraduate level, it really wasn't.
Huh.
Yeah.
You're
I mean,
just in your
again, but
own
like I said, by,
place.
by my senior year, I mean, it's hard to know exactly when because I studied Chicago for my PhD.
Mm.
So exactly when I learned what, it's hard to remember.
So, what made you decide to go into econ and not math?
Oh, I certainly didn't have the math skills to get a PhD in math. There's no way so that wasn't really an option. It's actually I mean, I was interested. When I first started, I was kind of interested in government service.
Mm.
And I remember talking to somebody in the econ department about doing this as a career, and he said, "Well,
Yeah.
maybe you should get a PhD in economics first, and then
Oh,
you could use that to get a job in the government." So actually, when I started my PhD, I was more thinking about ending up in DC than an academic track, which I think ended within a couple weeks probably of being there.
huh.
Um,
Is that something, thinking about your dad being a social worker and then a pastor and kind of like this, you know, public service kind of style, is that something that is in your family?
That is something very much in my family. Yeah, my mom. I know my mom was a teacher,
Right.
a special ed teacher. My dad was like the third generation social worker in
Mm,
his family. Or in the third gen. My dad was a social worker. Both of his parents were social workers. Uh, um, my sister's a social worker. I have a daughter who's a social worker. So
mm.
yeah, that was very much public service was very much in my blood and what I thought was important. And yeah, that's very much why I was going to thinking about a government kind of job.
So you're
Um,
thinking about public policy, kind of.
I was thinking about public policy. Yeah.
Okay, got it, got it. Well, so how is it during your like senior year? You're like, I'm gonna have to get a PhD in economics.
Yeah. That's basically when I decided to do it.
Yeah, yeah,
And it was, yeah, it's sort of, I don't think I spent a lot of time
huh,
thinking about it.
yeah. Well, so did you, was at that point, was Chicago sort of pulling at you a little bit, or were you just like, I'm gonna go to the best school I get into?
I can go to the best school I can get into. Yeah. I mean, I did not, going to Chicago twice was not like that. That was not what I really necessarily wanted to do. I think at both points in my life, it was the best decision at the
Mm-hmm.
time. Going to the same place through, I don't know if that was ideal, but it wasn't that bad. Like it's not like, I mean, partly I was a math major, but most of the people, there's very few people that I taught me both at the undergraduate level and at the PhD level.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, there's no overlap in your instruction.
very little.
I see. Because is it
Yeah.
is it that they're relying a lot more on, well, they've got like specialized lecturers that are teaching the undergrad classes and a lot of the faculty's teaching the graduate?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to do. They had on. I mean, it was not common to have PhD students teaching.
Yeah.
Um, they had some lecturers. I actually try. I made it. I made a real effort to try to get regular faculty rather than graduate students teaching. But a lot of the people that I'm taking were assistant professors.
Yeah.
Um, some of whom were no longer around.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, so you get there, you take the famous price theory class with Becker, is that right?
Yeah, as a PhD student.
As a
Yes.
PhD student. So what's that
Yeah.
first year like when
I
you're
was. Yeah, but it was amazing. I mean, the first year was amazing. I mean, Becker's class was probably the most influential single class in my career. He gets you to think like an economist.
uh,
Um, and
that go
we
ahead.
would just spend hours like working on Becker problem sets.
Mhm.
People in my study group.
Yeah. So are you overlapping at that time with Jeff Smith and with Petra Todd, or like, is that your cohort?
That's my Jeff was a little bit older,
Huh?
but Petra was at exactly my year.
What about David Mustard? Was he also at that
He
time?
was a year younger than me.
Okay, okay, okay. So you and Petra are both like, so is she in your study group?
She wasn't in my study group, no,
She was
but
not. Okay,
she was not.
okay. So so Becker teaches. Is it like he teaches price theory one, and then somebody else? Because I know Kevin Murphy later does, but who's
Yeah,
there at that time?
eventually Kevin Murphy started doing it with Becker.
Yeah.
Um, but at the time he didn't. It's a quarter system, so there's
Oh, right.
three different teachers. So the sequence that year it was Becker, and then Sherwin Rosen taught
Oh,
in the winter,
wow.
and then Rob Townsend taught the third semester.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I bet that was just exhilarating.
It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was,
So
yeah.
go
I
ahead.
didn't learn any game theory.
Uh-huh.
So there's a part of my education that's missing a little bit, but it was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've got prelims. They're famous prelims, I think, right? Because
Right.
Chicago has this tradition, or it used to, of just a giant net, and then they take gambles. And did you all kind of
I was a little bit. No, yeah, I was after they'd ended that model by that.
Oh, really?
So my class was not particularly big.
Oh,
And had relatively high pass rate.
oh, okay, okay. Well, so you finished that first year, and that would have been like what, like 91, because you get your master's in 91.
I got, yeah. Well, I guess it would have been 90. I finished I started in 89.
Okay,
So the end of my first year was 1990. Yeah.
okay. So after you take that class with Becker, is it ever crossing your mind, that you're going to like do one of these kind of more Becker kind of tracks that you might make him he's not your main advisor, is he?
He's not my main advisor.
Okay, it's
No,
Dr. Heckman.
I'm a Heckman
That's
student
what I thought.
through. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
How come so were you ever kind of drawn that you would be like, he's the most influential class? I could have imagined that you end up working with him, but you decide not to.
I didn't. I actually, when I went to grad school, I was actually thinking more about macro than I was about micro. And the reason is kind of related to what we were talking about. Is I was interested. I wanted to go because of policy reasons.
Right.
Right. It's a little bit. I realize I'm not really a policy person at this point, or not even all that close. Though I'd like to think it still drives why I'm interested in this subject. But like because and I was more interested in macro because as an undergraduate, macro was about policy. Macro was about fiscal policy and monetary policy, while micro was about stadium vendors selling beer and things. Right? There wasn't.
Yeah. Right.
So as an undergraduate, there's not that. There weren't many policy kinds of questions that I studied. Maybe it was a little bit of the course that I took. And then I got to grad school, and it's sort of the opposite. I mean, it's macro is interested in monetary and fiscal policy, but those are kind of the main two policies that they're interested in. And most of nuts and bolts macro is about writing down the models and thinking about the models that you're going to use to look at those rather than the policies themselves, while micro was more about policy. So when I started at Chicago, my fields were labor and macro.
Not econometrics.
Not econometrics. I didn't like econometrics that much, but then it became clear that that econometrics was really what I was good at, and what the most influential class that I took. So Heckman was at Yale. So he went to Yale. I don't remember exactly what years, but he came back in winter of my second year.
Okay. 91.
It would have been winter of 91.
Okay. Okay. Did you know much about him while he was gone?
I didn't know that much. I mean,
it's a decade before he wins.
I knew who he was for sure.
Yeah. But he's like, it's a decade before he wins the Nobel Prize.
Right.
And so what did you know about him before he got there?
I mean, we had learned what Heckman two-step is.
Right.
I mean, I'd studied a number of papers. I was taking. Well, I guess. I mean, it's really only a semester. Like the first year, you're not thinking about that kind of stuff.
Right.
The first quarter, taking Rosen's class. I took Sherwin Rosen's labor class. By then I knew who Heckman was, and he came back, and he taught a course. It was basically on structural econometrics. And this is when I realized that this is what I really liked, and this is what I was particularly good at, is the combination of writing down an econometric model, the combination of models and formal econometrics, and using that to think about data. It was really in that course that I realized that was something I really liked, and I also realized that was my biggest strength.
Yeah.
Economics.
But when you said you didn't like econometrics, what was it? What was it that was missing?
It's not that I didn't like it. It's just I wasn't excited about it. I mean, I guess I got excited about, maybe like a lot of us, I got excited about econometrics when we were using it to think about problems. In the first year, when it's just econometrics kind of for the sake of econometrics, I'm not going to say I didn't like it. I did.
Yeah.
But like not enough that it was going to be one of my fields. But then after dealing with Heckman, my fields became labor and econometrics rather than labor and macro.
Later than macro. So when you're doing labor, is it still I mean, I don't want to overstate this social work history, but like, is it kind of taking the place? Labor's kind of taking the place of that public service party. I kind of think of the labor economists being the most like that outside of macro.
It is. I mean, and especially a lot of what we're thinking about is income inequality.
Right.
Yeah, I mean the people that I got to take labor economics from at Chicago were Becker, taught a course, and Sherwin Rose, and then Jim Heckman, and then also Kevin Murphy.
Oh,
and,
wow.
So it, really was amazing training.
Man, that's incredible. So Dr. Heckman, he comes back in the winter, but when do you kind of have this, like, energizing connection where I don't want to overstate it, but like this thing where you're like, we're going to work together?
I actually started working for him. I was looking for an RA ship, and I actually started working for him as an RA right away. Like, I think even before he had moved back from New Haven.
Oh. How are y'all talking? Email? No. Is email around? What? How are y'all talking?
No, email was not around at the time. No, I guess I mean, he visited. He hadn't moved yet, but he would come to Chicago. I don't remember exactly the details, but he hadn't moved his house, but he had moved back to Chicago in terms of the job. He was in the department a lot.
Okay.
So I talked to him in person. Yeah.
So, like, if you could imagine that, this isn't the right example, but like say that you had Gary Chamberlain, or Hito Imbens, or some other kind of person as an econometrician had been your advisor, which obviously you haven't. But if you had them, what exactly is like the value added that Dr. Heckman had for you, if you just had to speculate and explain it to a normal person?
He has a way of thinking about the world, and he has a way of thinking about econometrics, it's partly that it's been incredibly influential, but I think it's also like that's how I like to think about it too. I think how my life would have been different if he had stayed at Yale and not come back. And I don't know what I would have ended up doing.
You might not have done econometrics.
I probably wouldn't have. I don't know. I might have.
Yeah. So when you say how did you say it? You said it's his formal way of thinking, or what did you just say?
His way of thinking about econometrics and this way of combining. I mean, there's a way of formalizing, combining economics with econometrics, and using formal models to think about data. I think is extremely useful. I mean, it felt
very different. You didn't have anyone else that quite was like that at Chicago to learn from.
Not at the time.
Okay. So what do you end up working on for your job market paper?
So my job market paper, I mean, it was about the return to college in the 80s. So the college went up. It was a standard selection problem. So is this return to schooling, or is it just an increase in the return to ability?
Yeah. Okay. How'd you approach it?
It's basically a selection model. So it was a dynamic programming selection model where it's a two-stage thing. First, people are deciding whether they go to high school or not, and then conditional on high school, do you go to college or not?
Okay. So when you write that dissertation, I don't know if a lot of people are like me, but did you immediately kind of see yourself as like, I'm a particular kind of labor economist? I have like a particular approach, or is it so unformed at that time, you wouldn't have like necessarily a intellectual identity the way that you do now?
I mean, I think I was more on the edge of econometrics at the time. I mean, when I first went on the market, I would have thought of myself as as much an applied econometrician as a labor economist. But the first paper really that I wrote was an econometrics paper. It was on identification of dynamic discrete choice problems. Ended up getting into the Journal of Econometrics. So I wrote that paper first, and then my job market paper was on return to schooling. They were closely related. It was a similar model.
Okay.
One was purely identification paper.
Yeah.
And then the other was an empirical paper.
Where did you place that job market paper?
It went into restud.
Oh, that's the restud. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Wow. So then you graduate, you go to Northwestern, and I'm just curious, tell me, some people uh they kind of hit the ground running. They've got the whole thing sort of figured out, and the track to tenure is, you almost can tell those people from the moment they get there. It's like it's going to be successful. And then there's others where, it takes some time to learn how, the production function is going to work and all that. So I'm just curious, when you land at Northwestern, what was it like for you immediately? And was there any kind of challenges that you saw on this path to tenure?
Yeah, no, there's two different parts of it. So I was doing some work with Professor Heckman at the time. Work with Professor Heckman and Lance Lochner,
Mhm.
which is some of the work that I'm definitely most proud of. So I had that stuff that was sort of ahead of me. And I had papers to finish. But so that in that sense, I would hit the ground running. But there's another sense in finding my own identity
Yeah.
and finding my own papers that, yeah, took a little bit of time.
How did it feel? Would you say it was like a difficult tenure track, like psychologically, or did you sort of feel like there was a point where you just kind of found your groove and you knew how you were going to do it, or did you even think about stuff like that?
Oh no, I was. I mean, it certainly. Yeah, I didn't know I was gonna. I mean, I never thought I was gonna get tenure until they called me up and told me I was gonna get tenure. So it was not.
Okay.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think I was probably a pretty marginal case in Northwestern, and I'm glad they believed in me. So yeah, no, it was very nerve wracking
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
during the time.
Well, so when you go up in '01, a lot of people have to fill out, they all do this tenure packet, and they kind of end up trying to communicate who they are and what their work is. And then the letter writers will do that too. And I'm just curious, like, what kind of economists were people trying to explain to your colleagues or just even to yourself, like, Chris is doing this kind of work and he's this kind of econometrician? What would they said back then?
I mean, I think so I was, it was sort of interesting. I mean, it's kind of weird thing. I'm no longer thinking of myself really as an econometrician. Um, but kind of there's a set of people that were in between labor and econometrics. That was, even though it was sort of between fields a little bit, there were a lot of well identified people that were in that area. I mean, Jim Heckman being, um, key example of one, but Richard Blundell, Costas McGear, Ken Wolpen,
Yeah.
maybe more on the labor structural side.
Yeah.
Joe Hutz, who was also on my thesis committee, Bob Miller, Tom McCurdy. So I think there was a clear set of people that I think I could identify with, and I could think of myself as that kind of economist. So even though it's somewhat broad, I think, and maybe I did have some econometrics papers. Like for me, coming up with a set of letter writers, it was relatively clear who those people should be. Of course, I don't know who they actually picked, but
Right.
yeah,
So
Robert Moffat would be another one.
so for the sake of the listeners, that don't quite know what that grouping is, what exactly is that grouping that you're describing of those labor economists? How is it that you sort of have this community that's like a natural place for you? What would you say is to others about what that is?
Yeah, it's two different things. One is a set of people that are, a lot of them are thinking about structural models,
Uh-huh.
but not everyone necessarily. But it's formalizing and combining econometrics with labor economics and empirical micro,
Yeah.
in a more formal way, and usually maybe a little bit more technical way.
Mhm.
Um,
Was it so? Was it when you were like in '01? You think about this alternative branch within labor econometrics that you sort of think about with like Card, Angrist, this what they call that design tradition. Is that are there like at that time, like bright red lines kind of separating groups of people, or like because later it sort of seems like there's this clear, almost philosophical approach that's taken. But what was it like for you then? Is it just like everybody's just doing the same? Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so so for me, I've always been somebody who's I mean, I don't think of myself as a purely structural person,
Oh,
and certainly appreciate other kinds of things. I mean, my senior colleagues at Northwestern at the time were Joe Altanji,
yep.
and Becky Blank, and
Mm,
Bruce Meyer and Dale Mortensen, which
mm-hmm.
was incredibly lucky to have that set of people.
Wow.
So, clearly, I learned I learned a ton, especially from Joe Altanji and from Bruce Meyer, about
Mm-hmm.
how to think about those things. And Bruce is definitely more. He's done structural stuff, but he's more on the design based
Mm-hmm.
side.
Yeah.
Um, Joe came from
Princeton. Yeah.
Princeton,
Right.
as part of that thing. But among people on that side, has probably done more structural stuff than others. So,
Wait, but
um,
is it the case that like, when everybody's making jazz music, it's like there's no real difference, but then later you're kind of like able to talk in terms of the genres of being different. So like, would you even back then sort of said, yeah, there's like, there's a structural approach, there's this design approach, or is it just kind of like not as clear differences between approaches as it's like now, you because you have Nobel prizes, it's like stamps on things.
I mean, I think if anything, it was clearer back then than it is now.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it's certainly, yeah, there were definitely differences back then.
Mm,
Um,
mm. Well, so this is
yeah.
a good point. So to segue a little bit, you mentioned Dr. Altanji. So uh, your most cited paper is this 2005 JPE with Dr. Altanji and Elder. And for the sake of the people that aren't in labor, this paper, would you just kind of tell a little bit about what this paper is? Because I want to just talk about the origins of it a little bit in just a second.
Yeah, yeah, and I sort of bring that up, and that's not a structural paper.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that I don't know if I would call it. It's sort of it's an applied econometrics paper,
Yeah.
and maybe a design based paper. I mean, there's almost two different things to it. I mean, it's an empirical paper that studies the effect of Catholic schools, and it started as an empirical paper. But the main thing it's cited for is we formalize this idea of using selection on observed variables to say something about selection on unobserved variables.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had anything like that been done before? This, I mean, you think about Dr. Heckman's two-step selection approach, where you've got some explicit modeling of it. This kind of approach of being able to talk about that selection on things you can't see and being able to say something about it on the things you have seen. Is there a precedent to that before your paper?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say we're formalizing. I mean, I think what we did is formalize what people already did
Oh, yeah.
informally. So,
Right.
like if you go to any RCT, table one is going to be a balance test. Well,
Yeah.
that's exact that. I mean, that's what a balance test is.
Mm.
It's the idea is the experiment, and we're kind of formalizing that idea. I mean, the idea in a balance test is that the experiment was properly done. You
Yeah.
should see no difference in observed covariates.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So at some level, the way that I like to think about what we're doing is we want to get away from a test and say something about magnitudes. So
Oh,
a test, you can think people might do something similar with an instrument. So you just run a regression of the instrument on observed covariates, and you can
yeah.
test whether those things are positively related to the instrument or not.
Right.
I think the problem with you have the standard problem with tests. Just because you reject the null hypothesis doesn't mean that it's I'll say it the other way again. The fact you accept the null hypothesis doesn't mean that it's true. So if you have real crappy observed variables, they might not be correlated with the instrument, but you're not gonna reject the test. You also might, if you have a big enough data set, you might reject the null. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that the bias is large. So the idea of our paper is to formalize that and say, suppose that selection on the unobserved variables is the same as selection on the observed covariates. How large would your bias be?
Yeah.
So to me, it's really the idea of doing these tests and using observed variables to think about validity of an instrument, or certainly an RCT. That had been around for a very long time. What we're doing is we want to formalize it, put a little bit more, make some stronger assumptions about it, and then use that to say something about whether the bias is large or small. So it's getting magnitude rather than just whether you accept or reject a test. That's how I would think about it.
Where does the idea start? You and Dr. Altanji are at the school together, but Dr. Elder's at Illinois, right?
No. Todd was a PhD student at the time.
Oh, he's a PhD student.
He was a PhD student at Northwestern at the time. No, it's actually it actually kind of came generically. We had an idea for an instrument for a Catholic school. So it started as applied paper where we want to look at the effect of Catholic schools on outcomes, and we had an idea for the instrument. But then we were getting sort of crazy results. And then we did this sort of thing where we looked at the relationship between the instrument and the observed variables and realized that's the problem. And then we did similar things with other people, other instruments that people had used in this literature, and also saw this problem. And then we did something else that seemed like it worked much better. Just kind of playing around, and in doing that, now we decided, okay, let's formalize this. Let's people think about this, but let's think about exactly what it means to say the observables are the same as the unobservables, right? And that's, at some level, that's a contribution, is writing down a model that can allow you to say what that means.
Yeah. What was the response that when it was a working paper and you're presenting it? What was the reaction that you noticed it having?
A huge heterogeneity.
Oh, really?
Yes. Some people just loved it. Some people thought this is really important. This is revolutionary. This is going to be really important. Other people said, "Oh, this is BS. Like, why would selection on the observables be the same as selection on the unobservables? That doesn't make any sense. It's an arbitrary assumption."
But it was one that people kind of had been doing.
I mean, yeah, it's one that some people have been doing. Yeah, I think maybe the people that didn't like it weren't necessarily the same people that were doing the balance test.
Well, now it's like cited, 400. I mean, it's interesting to watch it. It's like, sometimes you see these papers that have a parabola, and yours is just this monotonic increasing. When did you guys start to notice that this paper is probably having an impact and being influential?
Like you said, it was sort of gradual. I mean, it got fairly cited. It got cited a fair amount relatively early.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think Emily Oster's written a paper that a lot of people have used, and I think that has certainly helped our citations, because I think a lot of people that use her things will also cite us as kind of an earlier step in that process.
Right. Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that too. Well, this other paper that I just kind of wanted to briefly touch on, it's kind of interesting too. It's, there's, until this recent wave of diff and diff papers, I mean, there wasn't a ton of diff and diff kind of technical work, but you've got this 2011 Review of Economics and Statistics with Timothy Conley. And I just was wondering, how did you guys even latch onto that one too? That idea of this like small number of policy changes.
This was something that just always kind of bugged us. Actually, maybe the thing that pushed me to do it, like we use it as an example in our paper. We talk about Sue Donarski's Hope paper.
Mm,
At one point, I was a discussant on that paper,
mm,
and I think I was certainly I read it. I think I was a discussant, and it was just in thinking about. I was thinking about that. I mean, it really wasn't unique there, but thinking about this problem where it didn't really make sense to use this asymptotic approximation, where it's
right,
kind of with a sample size of one.
right. Yeah. Well, so I mean, there's kind of like your paper, there's Abady's synthetic control paper, there's DiNardo and has that AJ policy paper that comes out in 2010 where he does randomization inference. It seems like there was this like stuff in the air a little bit about small number of treatments. It's not always diff and diff, but it's like small number of treatments. Is that so? There was like people, and even really, when you think about that Bertrand, Duflo, and Muhlenthal of
Yeah,
like, just kind of thinking of inference in diff and diff, even. So there must have been something going on that's like getting more focus or something. Is that
yeah,
right?
no, I think so. I mean, I think diff and diff was. I mean, it's partly that just diff and diff was becoming a very popular method, which lots
Yeah.
of people were using. And
Yeah.
just when that happens, more people think about what you're doing with it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they haven't stopped.
So you and Dr. Conley work on it. You're at Wisconsin at this point, right? Oh, 07, you get to Wisconsin?
It took us a long time to write the paper. We started working on it. Actually, we started working. We were together at Northwestern.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Actually, the three of us were together. We were undergraduates at Chicago at the same time. Then we were graduate students at Chicago at the same time. And then exactly the same year, we moved from Chicago to Northwestern.
Y'all both got the job. Y'all followed each other a long time like that?
We went exactly at the same time. We went
He's
from
not one of your
Chicago to
buddies
Northwestern.
he's not one of your college buddies, is he? The guy you're
I didn't know him as an undergraduate,
Oh,
really.
okay.
I mean,
Okay.
I knew we had talked, but he was, yeah,
Oh.
we didn't know each other from college very well.
So he's just like he's like a one of the, he's one of your old career friends.
Right. So we talked, yeah. So we spent lots of time talking about econometrics together, applied econometrics together when I was at Northwestern.
Huh.
So I don't remember if the project started. I don't remember if the project started while he was still at Northwestern, or I mean, he moved to Chicago after that.
Yeah.
So we certainly worked on it while he was in Chicago and I was at Northwestern.
Yeah. Well, so now looking forward, what now is it you're kind of most excited about in the stuff that's coming that you're working on or that you want to work
on? Well, I'm department chair right now, so
Yeah.
I'm spending. So anytime I do anything, I'm excited to actually do research rather than administrative thing. I mean, a number of papers that I'll say one thing that I like about the profession is I think is hopefully a positive effect in the profession, which is something that's relevant in a lot of the work that I'm doing right now, is using indirect inference, where you take as auxiliary moments something that comes from a design-based experiment. So it's a way to me of combining design-based work and the creativity of identification and design-based work, but then using it to inform structural models. I mean, I think this is an important area that the profession has developed during the last 20 years since I've been here. But I think that's a particular powerful way to do it.
So that's like stuff that you've kind of got in your pipeline that you're most excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I have papers. I have published papers that have done this too.
So it's not. I actually don't know this area.
It's not only new stuff.
Okay.
But I think pretty much all of the papers that I'm working on are doing some level of this thing. I mean, I think two papers that I'm working on, one I guess neither of them have drafts. One is closer to the draft than the other, but one we're using RCTs about tuition subsidies to estimate a structural model of college attendance and completion. So the elasticities of the model are going to come from RCTs and from design-based stuff. But then the advantage is you can put that in a structural model. Then you can think about alternative kinds of policies that people could have done. Another one is studying teacher labor markets that I'm working with some colleagues here. And there we couldn't find a good way to estimate elasticities of supply into teaching. So we ran a survey to ask students what they thought, and then we're going to use that to inform the model.
Oh, that's cool. Very cool. I only tangentially know about this work, and it's mainly single papers in development and things like that. So I don't know a ton of that. That's cool. Well, so I'm running out of time, so I want to wrap up. This is kind of a weird question. I ask people it every now and then. I still haven't figured out how to ask it or where I'm going with it. But if you could go back and talk to your old self, right when he got to Northwestern, or like maybe 6 months later, and you guys have a beer and he knows he's talking to you. All right. I'm curious, about, he's got all these sources of uncertainty that he's thinking about himself and the future. And of course, with you, it's all resolved, but you're not going to be allowed to answer specific
It's not really all
questions.
resolved yet. I still not done.
Yeah, you're not done. Right. Yeah, exactly. But you've like resolved some of them. And I'm just curious, you're not, I don't mean like, hey, be sure to, submit your job market paper. I mean, more like, what do you think that you wish you could tell him about, the stuff that has turned out to be really the best part, the things about the job that maybe he just needs to know are the best parts of the job. And then the other parts of the job that maybe seem like they're the most important, but that maybe you now see it a little different.
That's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer to that. Advice about doing research. I think sometimes I would get too isolated and I would work on problems for a very long time that weren't very interesting. Like if I was going to give professional advice to myself, it would be talk to people more, because sometimes we have this problem where we want to solve this problem, and we fight forever to try to solve this problem. Without thinking about whether the solution is actually interesting to anybody else other than themselves. Right. So if I gave a piece of professional advice, that's something that I would have given to myself, but that's not exactly what you asked.
No, that is kind of interesting. I mean, you're saying that that's something that over time you realized had been it was a shift in your productivity or satisfaction a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't use my time as effectively as I could have as an assistant professor.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. Well, it's been really great talking, Chris. I really have enjoyed this, and I hope we get to see each other in person one day.
Yeah, it would be really nice to meet you at some point.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know how this was. Like, I didn't ask you any question. I don't know if I was. I don't know if I didn't know whether
I like listening to you. I wanted to, and I think most people are probably. I like hearing your story, and it's supposed to just be me listening, learning a little bit more about you.
Because I felt rude a little bit, not asking you about your experience, but it occurred to me that if you have this conversation with everybody and everybody asks you about your experience,
right,
every single podcast is going to be
me saying the same thing. Yeah, it's like I wasn't.
So I felt rude about doing that.
Oh, no. Well, it's so nice to meet, and I will definitely, if I see you at a conference, I'll come up and say hey.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. Bye,
Okay,
bye,
take
Chris.
care.